Welcome to Chapter 6. This week we're going to be talking about metabolism. So metabolism is all of the chemical processes that are happening in our bodies or in living organisms at any time. It's the summation of all of them. So it's how we're going to use energy, how we're going to release energy, it's all of that. Bioenergetics is the study of energy systems through living things. How are they getting their energy? Are they autotrophs? Are they chemotrophs? Are they heterotrophs? Producers are going to get their energy from the sun, from heat. Producers then act as energy for things like decomposers, fungi, bacteria, worms, and for consumers like animals or humans. Animals can also be, or consumers can also be, food for decomposers, which then release heat into the environment. So many of the living things are going to use these carbohydrates or sugars as energy, as their primary energy source. Glucose will be broken down to make ATP molecules. We can even store glucose as glycogen as humans, to be used at a later date where we'll need that glucose to increase our blood sugar to give us more energy. There's two main metabolic pathways, and they come together to form metabolism. It's going to be where substrates are converted into their final products. It's all of your chemical reactions. So there are anabolic pathways, or anabolism, which is going to require energy because we're taking smaller molecules and forming larger complex molecules. So remember our monomers coming together to form our polymers or macromolecules. So as you can imagine, this is a chemical reaction that requires energy. So in this case, there are 4 small molecules coming together to form a larger molecule. So a good example would be amino acids coming together to form proteins. We'll need energy for that. In catabolism, or the catabolic pathways, it's the opposite. So we're breaking down these larger molecules into the smaller components. And in this process, we make or release ATP. One of the major topics we're going to talk about today is energy. Energy is the ability to do work. The main types of energy that we'll talk about are kinetic energy, potential energy, and a subset of potential energy, which is chemical energy. In kinetic energy, this is energy with objects in motion. So remember, energy is the ability to do work. So with kinetic energy, it's moving objects that are doing work. Wrecking balls are doing work. Speeding bullets are doing work. There are so many things. If they're moving, they are doing work. With potential energy, this is energy associated with the potential to do work. So this is more of an abstract concept. Try to think about things that could be moving or are about to move. Those things have potential energy. So a suspended wrecking ball. Once that wrecking ball is released, it will be moving more toward the kinetic energy. Someone about to skydive, water dams that are holding water back. So as the object starts to descend more into movement, so if a person is waiting to jump out of an airplane, they have potential energy. As they jump out, that potential energy will start to decrease as their kinetic energy will start to increase. It's not an automatic thing. There is a point in time where the potential energy and the kinetic energy are equal. One really good example of potential energy are the chemical bonds that are holding together these macromolecules in our bodies. And that is called chemical energy. So as I said before, it's a type of potential energy. When those bonds are broken, energy is released. So once the bonds are broken in glycogen, holding all of these tiny glucose molecules together, glucose is released, energy is released. and we can start to use those monomers for chemical processes. Chemical energy provides living things with the energy from food. We break chemical bonds when we chew our food that we're taking into our bodies. Free energy is how we're going to quantify energy transfers. How do we quantify taking food into our bodies, which was a plant or an animal, and taking that and converting it into something that we can use? So energy that is usable and can be used to do work is called Gibbs free energy, usually denoted as G. Entropy is any energy that is released through heat or into the environment through heat. So after all of that released heat energy is accounted for in entropy, all of that other energy is our Gibbs free energy, and it's just named after a guy with the last name Gibbs. Anytime you see this triangle, it's called a delta. So delta G is a change in free energy. Delta always means a change in. So to be able to start quantifying these energy transfers, how to quantify how much free energy we have from a chemical process, we have to subtract the amount of energy that's lost to entropy from the total energy change. The total energy change is delta H, so change in energy. H is enthalpy. And we subtract that by delta S, which is our entropy, multiplied by the temperature, which is T. T for temperature is the absolute temperature in Kelvin. The change in free energy is equal to the enthalpy minus the temperature times the entropy. There are a bunch of examples in your book also that you can do some practice problems with. It gets to be pretty complicated. So when you're doing these delta G equations, you'll come out with one of two outcomes. You'll either have an exergonic reaction or an endergonic reaction. And you'll be able to tell that by if the delta G is positive or if it's negative. If it's negative, then it's an exergonic reaction. In an exergonic reaction, our reactions are going to release free energy. It's called a spontaneous reaction because it does not require energy to be added to the system. Not that it occurs instantly. It just means spontaneous, as in it doesn't need energy to run. So the products will have less free energy than the reactants because we are releasing some of that energy out into the environment. Energy is exiting the system, and that's how you can remember it, X for exergonic. Exergonic reactions, the energy that's coming from it, can be harnessed to perform work in the cell. Some examples are iron rusting or catabolic reactions, where we're taking a bigger molecule and breaking it into smaller molecules and releasing energy as we do so. So you can see that the reactants have greater Gibbs free energy than the products do because we're releasing some of that energy. So remember, exergonic reactions will have a negative delta G. Endergonic reactions will have a positive delta G. They require energy input, which is why they're considered non-spontaneous. It does not release energy. In fact, you need it in order for it to run. So products are going to have more free energy than the reactants will, because we are making energy storing molecules. So any of the chemical processes involved in anabolism, creating those bigger macromolecules that are stored so that they can be broken down into their smaller molecules later on in catabolism for usage to make energy. So in anabolism, we're using energy to make these storage molecules. But in catabolism, in the exergonic reactions, we are breaking those bigger molecules down to make energy. So, in chemical equilibrium, we think about these chemical reactions that are happening in our bodies, and most of them are reversible, where some of the monomers can become the polymers, and the polymers can become the monomers. They can go both ways, absorbing energy one way and releasing it the opposite way. It's not usually just an irreversible reaction proceeding in one direction only. So cells will move toward equilibrium, but they'll never reach it because we as living organisms are open systems. So we always have things entering and exiting our systems. We're constantly requiring energy. We can transfer energy into our surroundings. We're open systems. Another example of an open system is a stovetop. So if you have a stovetop that's on, it's releasing heat energy into the environment. So closed systems can move toward equilibrium much easier than open systems can. As nothing is going to enter or exit, it cannot transfer energy to its surroundings. An example would be a pressure cooker. So all of the energy is focused in one place. It's not actually submitting heat into the surroundings until you open the pressure cooker, in which case it would become an open system. And lastly, for this week, we'll talk a little bit about activation energy. So in order for these chemical reactions to occur, we need to have enough energy in order for them to happen. So that energy is called activation energy, and it's typically denoted E subscript A. Before molecules undergo the chemical reaction, they enter this transition state where they become very high energy and unstable, so they do not typically stay in that transition state for very long. In our bodies and in living organisms, this activation energy will typically come from heat energy. That is because when heat is added to a chemical reaction, it catalyzes it. So it lowers the activation energy, and it's going to speed up the reaction because the molecules tend to collide and move a lot quicker, and then therefore collide because they are moving more quickly. And the collision of these molecules will help this reaction to proceed. So a higher activation energy will actually slow reactions because it's this amount of energy that needs to be surmounted before the reaction can take place. So things like enzymes that help to catalyze reactions and speed them up tends to lower the activation energy. Think of it kind of like a threshold. So that is where we'll pick up next week. We'll talk a little bit about thermodynamics.